Welcome to Called to Serve. You know, I've often told you before, you may recognize our guest this week. Well, this time I can really say you're probably going to recognize our guest this week. We have the great honor of being joined this week by Bishop Robert Muench, the Bishop of Baton Rouge. And he's here to tell us his story and how he was called to serve. Welcome to our program Called to Serve. You know, we've often had guests here who are able to tell us their vocation story and just give us some amazing testimonies of how God calls us to service and ministry. Today we're very excited because we get to talk to a very familiar member of our Baton Rouge diocese, and that is the Bishop of Baton Rouge, and that is Bishop Robert Muench. Welcome, Bishop.
Thank you, Father Matthew.
We're here today to ask you the story of how you were called to ministry and how you recognized Jesus calling you to service. So please share with us the story of what Jesus did in your life.
Well, one of the great things about the process of aging is we get a little perspective of where we've been and where we are and where we're headed. And as I look back on my life, certain things are very clear. God was very good in giving me the two parents that He gave me, their love for one another, their love for God and the church and family, and their service. And so both of my parents now live in heaven. I got them a high place in heaven because they had to raise me. But it was a very religious family. Mom and Dad both were born in Louisville, Kentucky, and as was I and my older sister and my sister right under me. My youngest sister was born in Louisiana. When I was 3, my dad was transferred from Louisville, Kentucky to New Orleans, Louisiana, working for the telephone company. Now, I've told the story over the years that as a 3-year-old, I went to my dad and I said I'd like to move to Louisiana. Now, some people have believed that story, and I'm asking forgiveness from you right now. That story was kind of embellished. Because I continue the story by saying I thought for sure he knew I meant Baton Rouge. I had to live in New Orleans all those years and eventually got to Baton Rouge. Faith, prayer, devotion, these were part of who our family is all about, has been all about. And so church every Sunday, even when we would be on vacation, the first thing that when we would pull up to a motel for a Sunday, in those days, of course, they didn't have vigil mass, where's the nearest Catholic church and what are the times of mass? We never missed. And I remember as a youngster that sometimes, you know, if you'd be sick and you couldn't go to church, if later in the day I was feeling better, my mom said, "Oh no, you're not leaving the house. You are sick, so you are going nowhere." So that was a very important part of who we are. And one of the things about having parents live longer, my mom lived to be 92, my dad 101, wow, is that later on you ask questions that you never thought, you know, to ask before. And I asked a number of questions, and my mom said to me then that when I was 8 or 9 months old, I had a very bad case of asthma, and she and my dad would stay up at night, you know, trying to comfort me, and my mom said, "I was afraid we were going to lose you." Now, I have to interrupt and say, my dad, when he heard my mom tell me this story, said, "Mary, there you go, exaggerating again." Okay. But then she said to me, "I dedicated you to the Blessed Mother." And I believe that at that moment, I received a call to the priesthood. Obviously, not consciously. But I believe that was the source, the original source of the call. So we moved to when I was making my first communion. Let me say that because the pastor of the Catholic parish that we lived in, St. Leo the Great in New Orleans, said I was too young to start kindergarten, I wound up going to kindergarten and first grade in public school. Finally, in second grade, they allowed me to go to St. Leo. And so it was coming up time for First Communion. And my godfather and my godmother lived in Louisville, Kentucky, and I wrote a letter to my godfather in which I invited him to come to the First Communion in New Orleans. On May 18th, 1968, when I was ordained a priest at St. Louis Cathedral in New Orleans, he brought me a letter, the letter of which this is a copy, that I had written to him when I was in second grade. It's dated March the 16th, 1950. And I won't read the letter, but I'll read one sentence in it. Uncle Bernard, I think maybe someday I will be a priest. Did not remember writing that letter.
Wow.
But when he brought that letter, I could tell it was my handwriting. I had written the letter, inviting him to come down and thanking him for the money that he had given for my first communion. And again, instinctively, there was something that always attracted me to Mass and to the priesthood. And so as time went along, I became an altar server. And I remember learning the Shushipiyat was the hardest part. Now that's the one I remember the best in the Latin prayers that we used in those days. And in seventh grade, there was a fella in the eighth grade who, he and I don't remember all the circumstances, but we decided to serve the early morning Mass. It was either 6 or 6:30 at St. Leo. Every morning. And I need to back up one moment. In the middle of fourth grade, we moved from St. Leo to the neighboring parish of St. Raphael. My sisters were able to transfer to St. Raphael, but they didn't have room for me in fifth grade. They didn't have room for me in sixth grade. They didn't have room for me in seventh grade. So I would get on the bus and go to St. Leo. And it took maybe 45 minutes or so, but that's just what you did. So we had both decided to serve the morning Mass, which meant that I got up around 5 o'clock or so and walked maybe 8 blocks to the, and in those days, there was no worry about crime or anything, you know. Walked to the bus stop, went to the bus, and had the privilege of serving daily Mass. And then afterwards, we would go and get a donut and some milk, and then come back for school. And he graduated, and in my 8th grade year, I kept up that practice. It was never difficult for me to get out of bed in the morning to go serve Mass. As you age, that's not always the easy thing to get out of bed early. But in those days, there wasn't much happening, so anyway. Let me also mention that in 6th grade, my parents registered me in a new high school called Coriezu, which is now Brother Martin, which is about a mile from our house. So anyway, it came time for 8th grade, and my dad said to me, we got word from St. Raphael that they have room for you to go in the 8th grade there. I said, Dad, I said, you know, I would have transferred schools. St. Raphael was 3 blocks away, and of course everybody walked 3 blocks in those days. It was so simple. I said, Dad, for 5th grade, for 6th grade, for 7th grade, I would have transferred. But I said, I don't think 8th grade is a good year to transfer. He said, well, you know, you have your friends from St. Leo. If you go to St. Raphael, when you go to Coriezu next year, you'll have friends from both schools. I said, I don't think 8th grade is a good year to transfer. He let me, a twerpy little 12-year-old or 11-year-old, to make the decision And I stayed, doing that. Now, the reason why that has meaning is this. In my 8th grade year, there was a principal who was there, Dominican sister, who was there only 1 year, that 8th grade year. I was close to the priest. I was close to the religious sisters, the Dominican sisters. But she's the one who came to me and said, have you ever thought about being a priest? Her name was Sister Mary Alice Russell. I said, well, sister, yes, I have thought about being a priest. She said, well, they're taking applications for the high school seminary. And I said, well, I'm already registered to go to Koryezu. And so maybe I'll go after high school. And she said, well, if you're thinking about going to the seminary, why wouldn't you go now? And I didn't have a good answer to that question. Long story made short, I went to my dad and I said, I'm thinking about applying to the seminary. And I thought he was going to say, are you crazy? What are you thinking? He said, well, keep on thinking about it. Long story made short, he said, okay. And then so I went to the pastor, St. Leo, and Monsignor Gillespie, and I said, I live in St. Raphael Parish, but I go to school here, and I'd like to apply to the seminary. He said, oh, he said, you have to go to Monsignor Alleman, the pastor of St. Raphael. Well, St. Raphael basically didn't know me. So one Saturday, got up the nerve, and I walked the 3 blocks, and I rang the doorbell on Saturday afternoon. And the housekeeper answered the door, and I said, I'd like to see Monsignor Alleman. She said, oh, he's resting now. You have to come back after 3 o'clock. Well, so I went back home. I had to go back. So go there, 3 o'clock. He says, well, young man, I don't know you. And he called in a newly ordained priest, Monsignor Ray Hebert, who's a retired priest today. And I said, well, Monsignor said, no, I don't know him either, Father and Monsignor. I said, well, no, you don't see me around here because I always go to St. Leo. Again, they worked out the process, and I went to be interviewed at Notre Dame Seminary by Archbishop Rummel. Now, when I was in 6th grade, our class was confirmed by Archbishop Rummel. Our teachers had us petrified about the Archbishop coming for our confirmation and petrified that he's going to ask us questions and so on. And he didn't call on me. I said, this time I'm a goner.
Now it's just you.
It's just me.
That's right.
It's
He
just
has
me.
to call on
there
you
is,
now.
right.
Yes.
So we're in line, and we're asking other people who've been in line. So we go up to the to be interviewed, and I'm going like my doom. And they said, oh no, we have too many applicants this year. You're going to be interviewed by Monsignor Screen, the vocation director. I walked in the room. Monsignor Screen said, well, your grades are okay. You get along with your peers? I said, well, I think so, Father. And he said, what, do you have any hobbies? I don't know. I'm said something or whatever. He said, well, I don't have any more questions. And there was a group of priests. Do you have any questions? No. Couldn't have been easier.
Slid right through.
Slid right through it. God spared me again. God spared me again. So that was, I was accepted in the seminary, and I went to St. Ben for the 6 years, 4 years of high school, 2 years of college, and what a great experience.
Well, this is wonderful. We've been talking to Bishop Muench about his vocation story and really laying the important foundation of a good family life and faith within the family. And we're going to continue when we come back, asking him a little bit about his seminary experience, his formation, and maybe some of the priests who influenced his decisions during that time. Please, we'll be right back with Bishop Muench.
In recent years, media has gained great cultural influence. Catholic Life TV provides truthful, God-centered programming which benefits all our viewing audience.
Thanks to funding through the Bishop's Annual Appeal, everyone can receive the gospel message.
For more information, please call 225-336-8790 or visit baabr.org.
Welcome back to Called to Serve. This week we're talking to the Bishop of Baton Rouge, Bishop Muench, and he's telling us a lot about this wonderful formation that he had in his early childhood from his family, in his going to Catholic education as a young man. But now he's getting to some of the difficult years of formation, high school seminary, college seminary. So let's pick up where you left off, Bishop, and talk a little bit about how did you go from being a young man of faith who wanted to serve God to really then begin to say yes to being a priest through your seminary formation?
Even before going to the seminary, there was a priest who served at St. Leo the Great, Father Alcide Clement. His family still lives in Plaquemine, and he was from Plaquemine. And after I was accepted to the seminary, I will never forget this, he took me out of a whole day class, which I just loved. And in those days, when Father said something, Sister agreed. And he said, I'm going to train you to be the Master of Ceremonies for the Holy Week services. And we sat on the stairway to the priest sacristy. He didn't have book or paper with him. I could not do this today with the complexity of the Holy Week services. He went over everything and kept on repeating it. Didn't miss a beat, didn't miss a beat. And so I served as Master of Ceremonies as an 8th grader. And I will remember, and I knew I'd made some mistakes and all that, but the pastor, Monsignor Gillespie, this was the brother of Pat Gillespie, who was in our diocese, Joe Gillespie, who never talked to the servers. After the last service, when I walked in the sacristy, he talked to me and he said, you did a good job. I could have fainted.
It was a sign from God.
I will tell you, of all the compliments I've ever received in my life, to have that affirmation so simply said, how much that meant. I knew I'd made mistakes and all that, but Father Clement had prepared me very well, and Monsignor Gillespie was a wonderful man, but the very fact that he wouldn't normally talk to servers, that he acknowledged me, and then he that simple thing, and I think that's a lesson for all of us, how much a simple word to a young person can mean. Get to the seminary. Now I have to tell you about the grace of God. This is a grace that not everybody has, and it humbles me to say this. But from the moment I entered the seminary in 1956, through 12 years of preparation for the priesthood, through 45 years of being a priest, the last 23 of being bishop, there's nothing in my life that I wanted more than to be a priest.
Oh, what a wonderful gift.
It's a gift of the goodness of my parents, the grace of God, the wonderful priest and others who have been a part of my life, the family from which I come. And I say this because God is so good. And I realize that that's not everybody's experience, and I understand that. But I have to claim it because it's true. There's nothing that I love more than being a priest. And if we want to talk about being a bishop, we can talk about that in a minute. The great part about being a bishop is that you're a priest, but there are other things too. But that was a curve in the road. But we'll talk about that. But basically, through the Benedictines, I have so much regard for the Benedictine fathers and brothers at the Abbey. And there's still a few left from my era. They meant so much to us. And the liturgy, oh my goodness, how the liturgy has always been celebrated with such depth and reverence and beauty lives with me. And so after 6 years of being at the Abbey, for 4 years of high school, 2 years of junior college, I went to Notre Dame in New Orleans, which was for philosophy, which was the next step. I enjoyed my years at Notre Dame. It was different being in New Orleans versus being in Covington, and so it was a good experience. It was different than the Abbey. The Marist Fathers were there. And I remember, well, Archbishop Cody had become the Archbishop of New Orleans, and he came to the seminary and he told us seminarians he wanted to send us to summer school so that we could be certified to be teachers. So I went 2 summers to Loyola and took courses to help in being certified as a teacher. At the end of that second summer, my last year at Notre Dame, though I was preparing to go for the 4 years of theology at Notre Dame, the vocation director said, Archbishop Cody wants to see you and one of your classmates. We went into the Archbishop's office, and he said, I am going to send you to Catholic University Theological College because I want you to not only get your seminary training in theology, but I want you to do a double major. I want you all to get master's degrees in education, in administration, so that when you come back as a priest, you can be a high school principal. Now, I have to tell you what was going on inside of me. My heart sank. I wanted to be a priest in the parish. The parish is everything. I had nothing against schoolwork. I had nothing about being maybe part-time. But the parish was where my love was. And I just said, oh no, okay. So, but then he said, your first year you can only do the theology. So look around, there's something else. So my classmate looked around and he said, I'd like to get a degree in philosophy. And so the Archbishop said, fine. I said, now that's putting more pressure on me. I said, well, I looked around, there was nothing in pastoral education or formation like we have today, programs. So the closest I could come was counseling. So I said, could I make counseling my major? And so he said, fine. Well, then, all right, dodge that bullet. Then that September, he was moved to Chicago, and Archbishop Hannon came actually before September. Archbishop Hannon came in September of '65 to New Orleans. And I said, I've dodged that bullet, ta-da! And I'm never going to tell Archbishop Hannon what Archbishop Cody was first thinking, because I worked out the deal. I didn't have to. Everything was going great. I loved the seminary, and was assigned to a parish in my deacon year, that is the summer after I was ordained a deacon, St. Louis King of France in Metairie. They famously call it Bucktown. And loved it. Went back, finished everything, was assigned back as a priest to St. Louis King of France. Nothing can be better than this. I am so ecstatic. Everything is going great. And then one morning, I'm at the breakfast table, and the housekeeper comes to me and says, Father, you have a phone call. And I said to myself, normally they would just hold the call, So I got out from breakfast and went to the phone, and she said, it's Archbishop Hannon. I'm going like, uh-oh. You know how they say no news is good news? So the Archbishop says, listen, we have a priest at the seminary prep school that's got a throat condition. He has to be replaced. So I want you to go tomorrow and take his place.
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Okay, all right.
Tomorrow. Full time.
Not
Full
next
time.
month
Tomorrow.
or anything like
Tomorrow.
that. Okay.
I remember saying, Archbishop, can I have a day to pack? Because I'm saying, you just promised the man obedience and respect. I mean, and so it wasn't that he had anything against that, but I was so happy where I was.
Yeah.
And so with 1 day's notice, I was gone from the parish before they even knew I was gone. Walked into a classroom and didn't even have a chance in the meantime to get the textbook. I mean, I had to fake that first class, and it all worked out. And the last 4 years, I was there for 8 years. The last 4 years, I was the rector, the chief administrator, the very thing I was dodging all these times, and God's going, ha, 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 ha. Because I also can tell you in 1961, when Baton Rouge was made a diocese, which used to be part of the Archdiocese of New Orleans, I said to myself, gee, Baton Rouge is a nice place, but now I'll never have a chance to go to Baton Rouge because that's no longer part of the Archdiocese. God said, sometimes it's good that you don't know everything God has in mind.
Absolutely.
It turned out great, but you don't need to know it too soon.
That's right.
In my last year, my 8th year, I went to Archbishop Hannon. I said, Archbishop, I've been in the seminary for 12 years. Now I'm working in the seminary preparatory school for 8. That's 20. is it possible I could go to a parish next year? And he said, fine. So I was assigned to a parish, St. Matthias in New Orleans, and wonderful pastor there, Monsignor Anthony Wegman, and had a wonderful experience with him. And in the course of events, I was asked to help out in the chaplaincy program at Brother Martin High School, which is the successor to Coriezu. And so I wound up going there. A brief story. In the summer of between 8th and 9th grade, I remember my mother getting a phone call. In those days, one phone to a house, you know, and she said, Bobby, brother from Coriezu's on the phone, and these are the days, they're going to have orientation coming up. I said, Mother, tell brother I'm going to the seminary. And so brother, she said, well, brother says many people leave the seminary, so it would be good for you to come so that you'd know. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to show that brother I'm never going to leave, and I didn't. So there is some anonymous brother of the Sacred Heart that is equally responsible for my vocation because, like, now I'm sorry in retrospect I didn't go to the orientation. I wish I had, but getting back to early priesthood, getting to the parish. The other thing besides wanting to be full-time in the parish, the other thing I didn't want to be was in chancery work. Well, Archbishop Hannon called me and said, we're reforming things. I'd like you to be vicar for Christian formation, which is the supervisor kind of for the offices of many of the offices that have to do with Christian formation, and so education, youth, and so on. And so, but it was part-time, so I said, all right, fine. Well, then wound up later, I became vocation director of the diocese. There again, that's not what I would be looking to do. And then eventually worked with Archbishop Hannon. When Bishop Ott came to Baton Rouge, I was assigned to his office, and then worked with Archbishop Hannon for several years. And then when Archbishop Schulte came, I told him, I said, when you get someone to do this work, I'd be glad to go to the parish. A year later, that summer, I was named Vicar General by Archbishop Schulte, and then a year later, Auxiliary Bishop. And after ordaining me in 1990 as Auxiliary Bishop, we were coming back. He said, you know, when you told me that you were moving out of my way to get someone else, that's when I decided I was going to keep you. I said, it's a good thing I didn't know that, because I'd have said something else. Yeah. Anyway, that turned out well. And then, of course, the call to Baton Rouge after my being 6 years in Covington, Kentucky. All have been very blessed, and God's been so good.
Well, Bishop, we certainly want to thank you for continuing to say yes, even when God called you out of your own plans. And we do want to thank our audience for continuing their prayers for Bishop Muench and for the Diocese of Baton Rouge, to continue to pray for vocations that young people will say yes, and also just to continue to pray for our diocese, that the Lord may continue to bless us and to bring us renewal as we are called to serve.